The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Promise Creek as Quincy Marshall dove behind a water trough, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild, perhaps nowhere more so than in this small Montana settlement, where he now found himself in a showdown he hadn't planned on. Blood trickled down his arm from a grazed wound, but it wasn't the pain that made his heart hammer against his ribs. It was the glimpse he'd caught just moments before of a face he hadn't seen in 15 years, Violet Turner standing frozen on the boardwalk, those unforgettable eyes wide with recognition. "Drop the gun, Marshall," came the shout from down the street. "This town ain't big enough for both of us." Quincy checked his Colt revolver, counting the remaining bullets. 4 shots left and a man determined to put him in the ground. All because of a misunderstanding over a card game and an accusation of cheating that had turned ugly fast. But the real shock wasn't the gunfight, it was seeing Violet after all these years, looking at him with the same smile that had haunted his dreams since they were children. "I ain't looking for trouble, Hogan," Quincy called back. "This is between you and Blackburn." "I was just sitting at the wrong table, too late for talk." The voice was closer now. Quincy risked a peek around the trough and spotted his opponent moving from building to building. Another shot rang out, splintering wood inches from his face. He had come to Promise Creek on business, tracking down information about his father's old mining claim. Finding himself in the middle of a shootout hadn't been part of the plan. And finding Violet that had been even less expected, the sound of a door slamming drew his attention. Through the settling dust, he saw Violet disappear into the general store. The distraction nearly cost him his life as a bullet whizzed past his ear. Quincy fired back, forcing his attacker to take cover. His mind raced. 15 years had passed since he'd left their small Ohio town as a boy of 13, promising to return for her someday. Life had taken him on a different path, from Union soldier to Texas Ranger to bounty hunter, but he'd never forgotten her face or the promise he'd made. Another exchange of gunfire, and then the blessed sound of the town marshal's voice boomed down the street. "That's enough. Both of you drop your weapons or I start shooting." The standoff ended with Hogan cursing but complying. As Quincy stood cautiously, holstering his weapon, his eyes were drawn to the general store. Violet stood in the doorway, her honey-brown hair caught in the late afternoon light. She looked at him with that same bright smile that had been etched in his memory since childhood. When the marshal had sorted out the situation and released him with a warning to avoid Hogan, Quincy found himself drawn to the general store like a moth to flame. The bell tinkled as he entered, and there she was, arranging cans on a shelf. "Quincy Marshall," she said without turning around. "I never thought I'd see you again." "Violet." Her name felt like coming home on his lips. She turned then, and the years melted away. She was no longer the girl of 13 he'd left behind, but a woman of 28 with the same warm eyes and freckles across her nose. He tipped his hat, a gesture from their childhood when he'd pretend to be a gentleman caller. "It's still mine to keep," he said softly. "What is?" she asked, though the smile in her eyes told him she remembered. "That smile. I claimed it when we were 10, remember?" "Said no other man had the right to it." "Bold words for a boy," she replied, setting down a tin of coffee. "Bolder still for a man who disappeared for 15 years. The accusation stung, but it was fair. I wrote. For the first year," she corrected, "then nothing." "Life got complicated," he said, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "It has a way of doing that." She dusted her hands on her apron. "So what brings the great Quincy Marshall to Promise Creek? I've heard stories about you, you know. The Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter. The man who brought in the Chambers gang. Not all the stories are true," he said, uncomfortable with his reputation. "I'm here about my father's mining claim, trying to sort out if there's anything to it." "Your father," her eyebrows rose. "I thought he died when you were young." "He did. But I found some papers. Turns out he had a stake in a silver mine not far from here." The bell over the door jingled again, and an older man entered. "Violet, my dear, have you got that order ready for the ranch? Just finishing it up, mister." Peterson, she answered, her professional smile replacing the more intimate one she'd shown Quincy. We should catch up, Quincy said quietly as she moved past him. There's a lot to talk about. I finish here at 6, she replied without looking at him. I live in the yellow house at the end of Sycamore Street. You can call on me there if you're so inclined. I'll be there, he promised, watching as she efficiently gathered items for Mr. Peterson's order. As he stepped back into the harsh sunlight, Quincy touched the wound on his arm. It seemed insignificant now compared to the ache in his chest. 15 years of wandering, and here he was, back in the orbit of the only person who had ever truly known him. He had a lot to make up for, and no idea if she would give him the chance. The yellow house at the end of Sycamore Street was small but well kept, with a neat garden of hardy wildflowers and herbs. Quincy stood on the porch, hat in hand, feeling more nervous than he had facing down armed outlaws. He knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. Violet had changed from her store dress into a simpler blue frock that brought out the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Her hair was loose now, falling in waves past her shoulders. You came, she said, as if she hadn't quite believed he would. I said I would. He shifted awkwardly. May I come in? She stepped aside, allowing him into a small sitting room furnished simply but with touches that spoke of care. A vase of wildflowers, a colorful quilt draped over a chair, books stacked neatly on a side table. It's not much, she said, following his gaze, but it's mine. It's nice, homie. He remained standing, unsure of his welcome. You own it, I do. There was pride in her voice. Bought it 3 years ago with savings from the store. I'm part owner now, not just a clerk. That's impressive, he said sincerely. You've done well for yourself. I had to. The words held no self-pity, just fact. After my parents died, there wasn't much choice but to make my own way. Quincy's chest tightened. Your parents, I didn't know when, influenza, winter of '69. She gestured for him to sit. Tea, please. He settled into a chair, placing his hat on his knee. I'm sorry about your folks. They were good people. They were. She busied herself with the kettle at the small stove. So tell me about this mining claim. Is that really why you're in Promise Creek? It is. My father apparently partnered with a man named Ellis Jenkins back in '53. They struck silver up in the hills, but there was some dispute about ownership. My father died before it was resolved. And you just discovered this now? She brought 2 cups to the small table between them. Found the papers in my mother's things after she passed last year. He accepted the tea with a nod of thanks. Figured I should look into it. Might be nothing, might be something. And your life as a lawman, is that behind you now? He sipped the tea, buying time. Mostly. I still take the occasional bounty if the money's good and the target deserves bringing in, but I'm not looking to die with a badge on my chest. What are you looking to do, then? The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. I've been saving, he said carefully. Thought maybe I'd buy some land, settle down. Never really had a place to call home, not since I left Ohio. Her eyes met his over the rim of her cup. And why did you leave, Quincy? You never did say in your letters, just that you had to go. The old pain surfaced, but he owed her the truth. My stepfather, after he married my mother, things got difficult. He wasn't a kind man, especially when he drank, and he drank often. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The bruises, I remember wondering. I kept them hidden as best I could, he admitted. But that last summer he caught me writing to you, said no son of his would waste time mooning over some girl. We fought. It was bad. I knew if I stayed, one of us wouldn't survive. So you ran. So I ran, he confirmed. Lied about my age, joined the Union Army in '63. Figured if I was going to fight, might as well get paid for it. You were 16, she said softly, looked older. They didn't ask too many questions by then. They needed bodies. He set down his cup. After the war, I drifted. Texas Rangers found me drunk in a Galveston saloon, saw something worth salvaging, I guess. Been chasing bad men ever since. And now you're here. And now I'm here, he echoed. Though I had no idea you'd be in Promise Creek. Last I heard, you were still in Ohio. I came west in '70, she explained. There wasn't much left for me there after my parents died. My aunt had moved to Promise Creek years earlier, so I followed. She passed 2 years ago, but by then I'd made a life here. A good life from the looks of it. He glanced around the cozy home again. Is there someone special in your life? The question was awkward, but he needed to know. A small smile played at her lips. Are you asking if I'm married, Quincy Marshall? I suppose I am. No, there was someone, the banker's son, but it didn't work out. Relief washed through him, though he tried not to show it. I'm sorry. Don't be, we wanted different things. She studied him. And you, no Mrs. Marshall waiting somewhere? No, he said quickly. Never found the right time or place or person. The last words hung in the air between them. I should go, he said finally, rising. It's getting late and I've taken enough of your time. Where are you staying? She asked, walking him to the door, the Promise Hotel for now. I'll be heading up to the old mine site tomorrow to look around. She hesitated at the door. It's dangerous up in those hills alone. There are still claim jumpers about and the old workings aren't always stable. I'll be careful, he assured her. There's a social at the church on Saturday evening, she said suddenly. Nothing fancy, just folks gathering for music and food. Would you like to attend with me? The invitation surprised him. I'd like that very much. Good. She smiled then, that same smile that had gotten him through cold nights on the trail and dark moments after battles. 8 o'clock. I'll be here at 7:30, he promised, settling his hat on his head. As he stepped onto the porch, he turned back. It really hasn't changed, you know. What hasn't? Your smile. It's exactly as I remembered it. He tipped his hat. Good night, Violet. Walking back to the hotel under a canopy of stars, Quincy felt something he hadn't experienced in years' hope. Whatever his father's mine held, he'd found something far more valuable already in Promise Creek. The old mining site was a half-day's ride from town, tucked into a steep ravine in the foothills. Quincy followed the faded map from his father's papers, picking his way carefully along overgrown trails. By midday, he'd found what he was looking for, a collapsed entrance marked with a weather-worn sign. The Second Chance Mine. Dismounting, he tied his horse to a scrubby pine and examined the area. The mine opening had caved in years ago, but there were signs of more recent activity: boot prints in the dirt, cigarette butts, a discarded whiskey bottle. Someone had been here, and not long ago. Quincy circled the site cautiously, finding a smaller side tunnel partially obscured by brush. Drawing his revolver, he pushed aside the branches and peered into the darkness. The tunnel appeared to have been recently cleared. He hesitated, weighing his options. Entering an abandoned mine alone was foolhardy at best, potentially fatal at worst. But he hadn't come all this way to turn back at the first sign of danger. Returning to his horse, he retrieved a lantern from his saddlebag and lit it. With his gun in one hand and the light in the other, he entered the tunnel, ducking to avoid the low ceiling. The passage sloped downward, the air growing cooler and heavy with mineral scents. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness beyond his lantern's glow. He moved slowly, testing each step before committing his weight, alert for signs of instability in the tunnel's supports. After about 50 yards, the passage opened into a larger chamber. His lantern illuminated evidence of recent work. Picks and shovels leaned against one wall, an oil lamp hung from a beam, and a small cart sat on rusted rails. Someone's working my father's claim, he muttered, examining fresh marks on the rock face. A glint caught his eye, and he moved closer, running his fingers along a vein of silver that snaked through the dark stone. The sound of voices echoing from deeper in the mine froze him in place. Quickly, he extinguished his lantern and pressed himself against the wall, listening. I'm telling you, Preston, this vein is getting richer the deeper we go. The voice was gruff, excited. Another month of digging and we'll have enough to clear out, head to California. If nobody catches on to us first, a second man replied. That fellow asking questions in town makes me nervous. Nobody knows about this place except old Jenkins, and he ain't talking, not with the money we're paying him to keep quiet. Quincy's jaw tightened. Jenkins, his father's former partner. The man who should have contacted his family after his father's death, who should have ensured they received their share of any profits. Still don't like it, the second voice continued. What if this Marshall fella has papers, legal claim? Then he might have a tragic accident in these dangerous old mines. the first man laughed. Wouldn't be the first. The implication was clear. Quincy carefully retreated back up the tunnel, moving as silently as possible. He needed to get to town, confront Jenkins, and secure his claim legally before these men realized he'd discovered their operation. Emerging into the afternoon sunlight, he quickly mounted his horse and spurred it down the trail. His mind raced. Jenkins had apparently been working the mine in secret, possibly for years, cutting deals with these men to extract the silver without legal ownership. By the time he reached Promise Creek, the sun was setting. He headed straight for the marshal's office, hoping to find information on Jenkins' whereabouts. Marshal Daniel Thornton was a weathered man in his 50s, with sharp eyes that had seen their share of trouble. He listened to Quincy's story with interest, examining the papers from Quincy's father. "These look legitimate," Thornton said finally. "Ellis Jenkins has been living on the outskirts of town for years. Keeps to himself mostly, though he comes in for supplies and the occasional drink at the saloon. Never seemed to have much money, which is curious if what you're saying is true." "I need to speak with him," Quincy said, "and I'd appreciate your presence, Marshal, to keep things official." "We'll ride out first thing tomorrow," Thornton promised. "Jenkins isn't going anywhere, been laid up with a bad leg for months now." As Quincy turned to leave, the marshal added, "You might want to watch your back, Marshal. If there's silver involved, men have killed for less." "I'm aware," Quincy replied grimly, thinking of the conversation he'd overheard. "I'll be careful." Instead of returning to the hotel, he found himself walking toward the general store. It was past closing time, but a light still burned in the back room. He knocked on the door. After a moment, Violet appeared, surprise registering on her face when she saw him. "Quincy, is something wrong?" "No." "Yes, maybe." He ran a hand through his hair. "Can I come in for a minute? I need to talk to someone I trust." She hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Come in. I was just going over the books." The store was shadowy and quiet, the shelves of goods creating intimate corridors in the dim lamplight. She led him to the back room, where a small desk was covered with ledgers. "You look troubled," she observed, clearing a chair for him. "Did you find the mine?" "I did." He sat heavily, suddenly aware of how tired he was. "And it's being worked illegally, by men who seem willing to kill to keep it." Concern crossed her face. "Are you in danger?" "Possibly. I'm meeting with Jenkins, my father's old partner, tomorrow with the marshal." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But that's not why I came to see you." "Oh," her eyebrow arched. "I realized something today, standing in that mine. I've spent 15 years chasing ghosts, my father's memory, bounties, whatever would keep me moving so I wouldn't have to stop and think about what I left behind." He met her eyes. "Who I left behind," her expression softened. "Quincy, let me finish, please. I know I have no right to walk back into your life and expect anything. You've built something good here without me, but seeing you again, it's like finding a piece of myself I didn't realize was missing." She was quiet for a long moment. "When you left," she finally said, "I waited for you. Every day I would check for letters. They came at first, then stopped. I told myself you must have found something better, someone better." "There was never anyone better," he said quietly. "There was never anyone else who mattered the way you did. The letters stopped because I was ashamed. I had nothing to offer you, no home, no future, just a boy playing at being a man. And now I might have something. If this claim is valid, if we can make it legal and safe." He trailed off. "But even if it's worthless, I'm not the same boy who ran away. I've built something to a reputation, savings, experience. I could stay, make a life here, if there's any chance at all that you might." The bell over the front door jangled, cutting him off. They both froze. "We're closed," Violet called out, rising. No response came, but Quincy heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving through the store. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his revolver. "Quincy, no," she started, but he was already moving, slipping through the doorway into the darkened store. He moved silently between the shelves, senses alert. A shadow shifted near the front window, and Quincy raised his gun. "Show yourself," he commanded. "Easy, friend," came a voice, and a figure stepped into a shaft of moonlight from the window. It was a young man, barely 20 by the look of him, hands raised. "I don't mean any harm," Stores closed, Quincy said, not lowering his weapon. What are you doing here? Looking for Miss Turner, the young man replied nervously. I have a message from my employer. And who might that be? Mr. Jenkins, Ellis Jenkins. Quincy's grip tightened on his revolver. What's the message? He asked me to tell her he needs to see her, tonight, said it's urgent. The young man's eyes darted to the back room. Is she here? I'm here, Violet said from behind Quincy. She'd followed him out, ignoring his instruction to stay put. What does Mr. Jenkins want with me at this hour, Billy? He wouldn't say, Miss Turner, just that it's important and can't wait till morning. Quincy and Violet exchanged a glance. This seems mighty convenient, Quincy said quietly. Jenkins wants to see you the same day I find men working his mine illegally. Mr. Jenkins has been a friend to me since I arrived in Promise Creek, Violet replied. He was kind when my aunt died. I can't ignore his request. Then I'm coming with you, Quincy insisted. He said to come alone, Billy interjected. That's not happening, Quincy stated flatly. Violet considered for a moment, then nodded. Tell Mr. Jenkins I'll come, but Quincy Marshall will be accompanying me. Billy's eyes widened at the name. The bounty hunter. Former bounty hunter, Quincy corrected. I'll tell him, Billy said, backing toward the door. His cabin is, I know where it is, Violet interrupted. We'll be there within the hour. After the young man left, Quincy turned to Violet. This could be a trap. Or it could be that Jenkins heard you're in town and wants to set things right, she countered. He's an old man, Quincy. 80 if he's a day and in poor health. Old men can still be dangerous, Quincy warned, but we'll go together. They rode out of town as night fully descended, following a narrow trail that wound through scrubby hills. Jenkins' cabin sat in a small valley, a solitary lamp burning in the window. Smoke curled from the chimney into the star-filled sky. Stay behind me, Quincy instructed as they dismounted. I'm not helpless, Violet reminded him, reaching into her saddlebag and withdrawing a small derringer. My aunt taught me to shoot. Despite the tension, Quincy smiled. Remind me not to underestimate you, Miss Turner. They approached the cabin cautiously. Quincy knocked firmly on the door. Who is it? Came a wavering voice from inside. Violet Turner, she called back. And Quincy Marshall. There was a long pause, then the sound of a bolt being drawn. The door creaked open, revealing an ancient man with a silver beard and rheumy eyes. He leaned heavily on a cane, his right leg wrapped in bandages. Come in, he said, his voice thin but clear. I've been expecting you. The cabin's interior was sparse but neat. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jenkins hobbled to a worn armchair and lowered himself with a grimace. So, he said, fixing his gaze on Quincy, Samuel Marshall's boy, you've got your father's look about you. You knew my father well. Quincy remained standing, positioning himself between Jenkins and Violet. As well as any man knew Sam, Jenkins replied. He was a private sort, but a good partner, honest, that's rare in mining. He gestured to a small table. There's coffee in the pot if you'd like some. What we'd like, Quincy said firmly, is the truth about the second chance mine. Jenkins' weathered face creased in a sad smile. Direct, like your father, he sighed deeply. I owe you an explanation and an apology. When your father died, I tried to find your family, sent letters to the address I had in Ohio, but they came back unclaimed. We'd moved by then, Quincy acknowledged, after my mother remarried. I should have tried harder, Jenkins admitted, but the mine had gone dry, or so we thought. I kept the claim valid, paying the taxes year after year, feeling I owed that much to Sam's memory. Then, about 5 years ago, some prospectors approached me, said they had new techniques, thought there might be more silver deeper in the mountain. Preston and his partner, Quincy guessed. Jenkins looked surprised. You know of them? I overheard them at the mine today. They're planning to clear out soon with whatever they've found. The old man cursed softly. I feared as much. They've been giving me less and less information, just enough money to keep me quiet. Said they'd kill me if I told anyone about the operation. Why tell us now? Violet asked, finally taking a seat across from Jenkins. Because I'm dying, Miss Turner, he said simply. Doctor says my heart's giving out, might be a month, might be a week, and I want to set things right before I go. He turned back to Quincy. Half that mine rightfully belongs to you. I've got the papers here to prove it. He gestured to a wooden box on the mantelpiece. Everything's there, the original claim, the partnership agreement with your father, maps of the workings. With those and my testimony, you can take legal ownership of your share. And the men currently working it? Quincy asked. Preston Wells and Joe Deacon. Jenkins spat the names. Bad sorts. They threatened me, yes, but worse, they've been cutting corners in the mine, not shoring up properly, taking risks. Men have died in those tunnels because of their greed. The marshal needs to hear this, Quincy said. We're meeting him tomorrow morning. I'll speak with him, Jenkins agreed, but you should know Wells and Deacon won't give up easily. They've invested too much, and the vein they've hit recently is rich. Very rich. They already know I'm asking questions, Quincy said grimly. And now I've led Violet into this danger as well. You didn't lead me anywhere, Violet objected. I make my own choices. Jenkins watched their exchange with interest. You two have history. Childhood friends, Violet explained. From Ohio? More than friends, I'd wager, the old man observed with surprising perception. Well, if you'll forgive an old man's presumption, life's too short for regrets. I've had my share in their poor company in the dark hours. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Quincy moved quickly to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 riders, he reported, his voice tense. Coming fast, Wells and Deacon, Jenkins said, fear evident in his voice, and probably that weasel Billy. He must have told them you were coming here. Is there a back way out? Quincy asked urgently. Door to the lean-to, then through the woodshed, Jenkins pointed. But they'll see you if you try for the horses. Quincy made a quick decision. Violet, take Mr. Jenkins and go out the back. Head for the trees, stay hidden. I'll deal with these men. I'm not leaving you, she protested. This isn't a debate, he said sharply. They're killers, Violet. Get Jenkins to safety, then go for the marshal. Before she could argue further, the riders thundered into the yard and a voice called out, Jenkins, open up, you double-crossing old fool. Go. Now, Quincy insisted, pushing Violet toward Jenkins. He drew his revolver and positioned himself beside the front window. With a last anguished look, Violet helped Jenkins to his feet and guided him toward the back door. Be careful, she whispered to Quincy. Always am, he replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Once they'd disappeared into the lean-to, Quincy called out, Jenkins isn't available right now, gentlemen. Perhaps you'd like to leave a message. A moment of surprised silence followed, then a harsh laugh. Well, well, if it isn't Marshall himself, saved us the trouble of hunting you down. I appreciate the consideration, Quincy replied evenly, but I'm afraid you're trespassing on private property. I suggest you move along. Not without what's ours, came the reply. The old man told you about the mine, didn't he? Doesn't matter, you'll never live to claim it. A shot crashed through the window, sending glass flying. Quincy ducked, then fired back, aiming at the muzzle flash. A cry of pain told him he'd hit someone. You'll pay for that, screamed a new voice. More shots followed, splintering the door and thudding into the cabin's walls. Quincy remained calm, counting shots and returning fire judiciously. He heard men moving, trying to circle the cabin. The rear door slammed open. They discovered the back exit. He needed to move. Staying low, he crossed to the hearth and grabbed the wooden box from the mantelpiece. Shoving it inside his coat, he made for the back door, firing twice more to cover his retreat. The lean-to was empty, but the woodshed door stood open. Outside, the night had turned chaotic with gunfire and shouting. Quincy spotted a figure moving along the tree line at the edge of the property, Violet, supporting the limping Jenkins. Another figure emerged from the shadows, cutting off their escape route. Even in the darkness, Quincy recognized Billy, the young messenger, now holding a rifle pointed at Violet and Jenkins. Without hesitation, Quincy fired, his bullets striking Billy's shoulder. The young man cried out, dropping his weapon. Run. Quincy shouted to Violet, breaking cover and racing toward them. More shots rang out behind him. Pain exploded in his left side as a bullet found its mark, but adrenaline kept him moving. He reached Violet and Jenkins at the tree line, pushing them into the cover of the forest. You're hit, Violet gasped, seeing the blood spreading on his shirt. It's nothing, he lied, the pain intensifying with each step. Keep moving. They stumbled through the trees, the sounds of pursuit growing more distant as the rough terrain slowed their attackers. After what felt like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, Jenkins collapsed against a tree trunk, his breathing labored. Can't go further, he wheezed. Quincy's own strength was fading, the wound in his side bleeding freely now. He leaned against a boulder, trying to catch his breath. We need to bind that wound, Violet said, tearing a strip from her petticoat. And Jenkins needs rest. We can't stop, Quincy argued, though he knew she was right. They'll be tracking us. It's too dark for that, she countered, pressing the cloth against his side. And if we don't stop your bleeding, you won't make it to morning anyway. He winced as she tightened the makeshift bandage. When did you get so practical? When I had to be, she replied simply. Now let me check on Mr. Jenkins. The old man's condition was deteriorating rapidly, his face gray in the moonlight filtering through the trees. My heart, he gasped. It's giving out. Violet knelt beside him, taking his hand. Save your strength, Mr. Jenkins. We'll get help. No time, he said weakly. Listen, both of you, in the box. There's a map, shows a hidden entrance to the mine, emergency exit. My father dug it. Wells and Deacon don't know about it. Don't talk, Quincy urged, crouching painfully beside them. Save your strength. Jenkins gripped his arm with surprising force. Promise me, you'll set it right. The mine, men died because of their greed. I promise, Quincy said solemnly, and you too. Jenkins' eyes moved between them. Don't waste what time you have, life's too precious. His words trailed off, his hand going slack in Violet's grasp. She looked up at Quincy, tears shining in the moonlight. He's gone. Quincy bowed his head. He was trying to make things right. And now it's up to us, she said, gently closing Jenkins' eyes. We need to get to town, bring the marshal back here. We'll need to separate, Quincy decided. You go for help, I'll lead them away from you. Absolutely not, she said fiercely. You're injured, you wouldn't make it. I've survived worse, he insisted. I'm not leaving you, she repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. We go together or not at all. He recognized the stubborn set of her jaw, the same expression she'd worn as a child when she'd made up her mind about something. It had been pointless to argue then, it would be pointless now. Together then, he conceded. But we need to move. Can you help me up? With Violet's support, Quincy got to his feet, grimacing at the fire in his side. They left Jenkins where he had fallen, covering him with his own coat. There was no time for a proper burial, not with killers on their trail. They moved slowly through the forest, staying within the tree line but following the rough trail back toward town. Quincy's strength ebbed with each step, but Violet's presence beside him kept him going. The wooden box containing the mine documents weighed heavily inside his coat, a responsibility he was determined to fulfill. Dawn was breaking when they reached the outskirts of Promise Creek. The town was just stirring to life, a few early risers moving about the streets. They stumbled toward the marshal's office, drawing concerned looks from those they passed. Marshal Thornton was already at his desk when they burst through the door. He took one look at Quincy's blood-soaked shirt and Violet's dirt-streaked face and rose quickly. What in tarnation happened to you two? He demanded. Ellis Jenkins is dead, Quincy said without preamble, lowering himself painfully into a chair, murdered more or less by Preston Wells and Joe Deacon. While Violet quickly explained the night's events, Thornton summoned the town doctor to tend to Quincy's wound. Within an hour, Quincy had been patched up, the bullet removed from his side, and a posse was forming to track down Wells and Deacon. They'll head for the mine, Quincy predicted, examining the map from Jenkins' box. It's their only chance now. Grab as much silver as they can carry and run. Then that's where we'll go, Thornton said, studying the map. This hidden entrance could give us the advantage. I'm coming with you, Quincy insisted, attempting to stand. Both Thornton and Violet pushed him back into his seat. You're not going anywhere with that wound, the marshal said firmly. I've got 6 good men ready to ride. We'll handle Wells and Deacon. They're dangerous men, Quincy warned. So am I when the situation calls for it, Thornton replied. Rest, recover, I'll bring them in. After the marshal left, Violet helped Quincy to her home, where she insisted he take her bed to recover. Too weak to argue, he allowed her to settle him there, the doctor's laudanum making his thoughts fuzzy around the edges. "You should be safe here," she said, placing a glass of water within his reach. "I've sent word to Mrs. Lawson next door to keep an eye on the house, and Deputy Simmons will check in regularly." "Where are you going?" he asked, fighting to keep his eyes open. "To open the store," she replied. "Life goes on even on days like this. I'll be back to check on you at midday." "Violet," he called as she reached the door. "Thank you." She looked back, her smile warming him more than any blanket could. "Rest, Quincy. We have a lot to talk about when you're stronger." He wanted to say more, but the laudanum pulled him into darkness before he could form the words. When Quincy awoke, shadows had lengthened across the room. He blinked, disoriented, then remembered where he was. The pain in his side had dulled to a persistent ache. He pushed himself up carefully, wincing at the pull of stitches. The bedroom door opened, and Violet entered with a tray. "You're awake," she observed. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he replied dryly, "but better than I might have expected." "The doctor said you were lucky. The bullet missed anything vital." She set the tray on the bedside table. "Beef broth and bread. Think you can manage it?" He nodded, suddenly aware of his hunger. As he ate, Violet sat in a chair by the bed, watching him with concerned eyes. "Any word from the marshal?" he asked between spoonfuls of broth. "They returned about an hour ago," she replied. "They caught Wells and Deacon at the mine, just as you predicted. They're in jail now, awaiting trial." Relief washed over him. "And the mine, the marshal says it's legally half yours now, with Jenkins' share in question. His lawyer's been summoned from Helena to sort it out." She hesitated. "There's something else. The marshal said the vein they've been working is incredibly rich. You could be a wealthy man, Quincy." He set down his spoon, considering this. "Wealth was never something I sought." "What did you seek?" she asked softly. "Peace, maybe, a place to belong." His eyes met hers. Someone to belong with. The admission hung between them, fraught with possibility. "And now," she prompted. "Now I'm wondering if I found it all in the same place," he said carefully. "In Promise Creek." She took his hand, her fingers warm against his. "You know, when I saw you in that shootout on Main Street, my first thought wasn't fear for your safety or surprise at seeing you after all these years." "No, what was it?" "I thought he still wears his hat the same way, tilted just a bit to the left." She smiled at the memory. "Some things don't change, I suppose. Like your smile," he said, echoing their first conversation. "It hasn't changed since we were children." "You always did notice my smile," she mused, "even when we were 10 and you declared it was yours alone." "I was a possessive child," he admitted with a chuckle that made his side hurt. "And now, are you still possessive?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. "I'd like to think I've grown," he said thoughtfully. "I wouldn't claim something that wasn't freely given." Her fingers tightened on his. What if it was? His heart quickened. "Then I would cherish it, always." She leaned closer, her free hand coming up to touch his face. 15 years is a long time, Quincy. We're not the same people we were." "No," he agreed, "we're not. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe we needed to become who we are now to appreciate what we could be together." "And what could we be?" she whispered. Instead of answering with words, he closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a gentle kiss that deepened as she responded. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I never stopped thinking about you," he confessed. "Even when I didn't write, even when I was trying to forget, you were always there in the back of my mind, in my dreams." "I tried to forget you," she admitted. "Especially after the letters stopped. I even convinced myself I had for a while. And now I'm not sure I want to," she said simply. The days that followed passed in a haze of recovery and planning. Quincy regained his strength slowly, chafing at the confinement but enjoying Violet's constant presence. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of 15 years apart, rediscovering each other as adults while reconnecting with the children they had been. Word came that Ellis Jenkins had left his share of the mine to Quincy in a will signed just weeks before, making him the sole owner of the Second Chance mine. With the marshal's help, he hired a reputable foreman to assess the damage done by Wells and Deacon and to begin proper, safe operations. The church social came and went. with Quincy still too weak to attend, but Violet stayed home with him instead, creating their own celebration with music from her small piano and stories shared by lamplight. As autumn turned the cottonwoods golden along the creek, Quincy was finally well enough to ride out to the mine. Violet insisted on accompanying him, wearing a divided riding skirt that scandalized some of the town's older residents but seemed eminently practical to Quincy. The mine entrance had been properly secured with new timbers supporting the roof and walls. The foreman, a grizzled veteran of silver operations named Hargrove, greeted them with obvious respect. "Mr. Marshall, Miss Turner," he nodded. "We've made good progress. The damage wasn't as bad as we feared, and that vein is holding strong." He led them through the now safe tunnels, explaining the operations and the improvements being made. Quincy listened attentively, asking questions that showed his growing knowledge of mining operations. Violet observed everything with keen interest, occasionally offering suggestions that surprised both men with their practicality. When they emerged into the sunlight again, Hargrove excused himself to check on a new shipment of equipment, leaving Quincy and Violet alone at the entrance. "What do you think?" Quincy asked, watching her expression. "I think it's remarkable," she replied honestly. "Not just the silver, but what you're doing with it. Safety first, fair wages for the miners, proper supports. You're honoring your promise to Jenkins." "I'm trying to," he acknowledged. "It feels right somehow, like this is what I was meant to do." "And Promise Creek, is this where you're meant to be?" The question carried unmistakable meaning. He took her hands in his. "I think you know the answer to that." "I'd like to hear it anyway," she said, those gold-flecked eyes meeting his. "Promise Creek is home now," he said firmly. "You're home, Violet, if you'll have me." Her smile, that same, unchanged smile that had carried him through 15 years of wandering, bloomed across her face. "I believe I will, Mr. Marshall." He tipped his hat in that familiar gesture. "It's still mine to keep," he said softly. "That smile always has been," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. As they rode back to town side by side, the future stretching before them like the open trail, Quincy felt a contentment he'd never known before. The Second Chance Mine had lived up to its name, offering him not just wealth, but the opportunity to reclaim something far more precious, a love interrupted, but never truly lost. The wedding took place the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the hills around Promise Creek. It was a simple affair in the white clapboard church, with most of the town in attendance. Violet wore a dress of pale blue silk, ordered specially from Denver, with forget-me-nots in her hair. Quincy, for once without his weathered hat, stood tall in a new black suit, the scar on his side a reminder of all they had overcome. Marshall Thornton gave the bride away, having become a father figure to Violet in the months since Jenkins' death. As they exchanged vows, Quincy's voice rang clear and confident, his eyes never leaving Violet's face. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, he leaned in to whisper, "Still mine," before kissing her to the cheers of the assembled guests. The Second Chance Mine prospered under Quincy's ownership, becoming known throughout the territory for its rich silver and fair treatment of workers. Quincy and Violet built a house on a hill overlooking Promise Creek, large enough for the family they hoped to create, but not so grand as to separate them from the community they'd come to love. True to their roots, they maintained the general store as well, with Violet taking an active role in its management even as her belly swelled with their first child. When their daughter was born in the winter of 1876, they named her Alina after Violet's mother, and Quincy swore she had her mother's smile from the very first day. 2 years later, a son joined the family, Samuel Ellis Marshall, named for both Quincy's father and the man whose final act of conscience had brought them their second chance at love. As the years passed, Promise Creek grew from a small settlement to a proper town, with the Marshall family at its heart. Quincy's reputation changed from that of a dangerous bounty hunter to a respected businessman and community leader. When trouble came, as it sometimes did in the still Wild West, he faced it with the same steady courage, but now with far more to protect and cherish. On warm summer evenings, the Marshalls could often be found on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. Sometimes Quincy would tip his hat to his wife, a gesture that never lost its meaning, and she would smile that same smile that had captured his heart so many years before. "Still mine," he would say, and she would always answer, "Always has been." In a land where second chances were rare and happy endings rarer still, they had found both not through luck or fate, but through the courage to recognize that some bonds, forged in childhood and tempered by time and distance, were simply meant to endure. The West would eventually be tamed, the frontier closed, but the story of Quincy and Violet Marshall would be told in Promise Creek for generations to come, a reminder that even in the wildest of times and places, love could find a way home.